The air is thick, not with smoke or fire, but with time. Heavy, slow. Every second stretches like it knows something you don't. Inside one of America's deadliest prisons, the fluorescent lights buzz overhead, casting long shadows across the white walls. A steel door hums as it slides open somewhere in the distance. A guard coughs. A pair of footsteps echoes off the concrete. But mostly, there is silence. This is death row. Here, silence isn't peace. It's a waiting room for the end. Each man in his cell knows the date. Some circle it on calendars, others count backward from it, night by night. But no one forgets, especially in July 2025, a month where the system didn't just whisper death, it shouted it. 5 men, 5 executions, 5 very different crimes, but all ending the same way, strapped to a gurney, staring up at fluorescent lights, knowing there's no more appeals, no more time, no more noise, just stillness. But it's what happens before that final breath that pulls people in. The quiet rituals, the eerie last suppers, the final words, some filled with regret, others with rage, and some with nothing at all. There's something deeply disturbing about knowing what a killer ate before he died, about hearing a man apologize moments before poison enters his veins. Or worse, when he doesn't apologize at all. In the United States, execution isn't carried out with spectacle. It's quiet, clinical, sterile. That's what makes it so chilling. You might imagine chaos, screaming, tears, last-minute confessions. But in reality, it's closer to watching someone fall asleep and never wake up. July 2025 brought this eerie routine into sharp focus. One by one, across multiple states, executions were carried out with military precision. Each man woke up, ate his last meal, spoke his last words, or refused to, and was led into a room he'd only seen in his nightmares. But don't be mistaken, this isn't a sympathy piece. The men who died didn't stumble into death row by accident. They earned their place there, with blood, with fire, with acts so heinous they made seasoned detectives cry behind closed doors. And yet, even in their final moments, these men remained human. That's the unsettling part. They smiled, they joked with guards, they asked for music. Some cried, some didn't. But all of them died. That's what makes execution stories so irresistible, so disturbing. They force us to ask questions we never want to answer. What would you eat if you knew it was your last meal on earth? What would you say if you had one final sentence to speak into the void? And if you had done the unthinkable, killed without mercy? Would you be brave enough to face the end with your eyes open? The death penalty isn't just about justice. It's about memory. The memory of victims who never got to say goodbye. The memory of the families left behind. And, in some strange way, the memory of the killers themselves, frozen forever in their last words and final choices. July 2025 reminded America that evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears a prison jumpsuit. Sometimes it smiles during a final meal. And sometimes it leaves this world without ever saying sorry. In the next chapters, you'll meet the men who were executed this July. You'll learn what they did. You'll hear what they ate, what they said, and how they faced the end. Not to glorify them, but to understand the terrifying weight of their choices, and to remember the people whose lives they stole. This isn't a story about death. It's a story about the moments right before it. July 3rd, 2025, Texas. A sunset bled across the sky as the gates of Huntsville prison locked shut for the night. Inside, Ronald Travis sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the pale green walls that had boxed in his life for nearly 2 decades. He wasn't crying. He wasn't praying. He was still, like a man who had already died, just waiting for his body to catch up. Ronald was 48, but prison had aged him cruelly. Hair graying at the edges, deep lines across his face, and a stare that could silence a room. He was convicted in 2006 for a crime that burned itself into the memory of everyone who lived in the quiet Texas town of Abilene. It began with a robbery, at least that's what he claimed. He broke into the home of a retired schoolteacher and her husband, Harold and Marlene Jensen, at 2 a.m., looking for cash. But something snapped inside him that night. Instead of taking the money and leaving, Ronald tied the couple to their chairs. Then he beat them brutally. And when it was over, he set the house on fire, with them still inside. What emerged from that night wasn't just a double murder. It was a message. Some people don't just steal lives, they erase them. The fire was so intense, the bodies had to be identified through dental records. And Ronald? He was caught just 3 days later, trying to pawn off a silver locket that belonged to Marlene. During his trial, he was calm, cold. He never apologized, not once, even when the victim's family members sobbed in the courtroom. He sat there, blank. The jury didn't need long. The death penalty was unanimous. On death row, Ronald remained an enigma. He rarely spoke to other inmates. He declined media interviews. He didn't join any religious groups. His cell was bare. No photos, no drawings, no letters. Just a concrete bed, a toilet, and silence. When his execution date was confirmed for July 3, 2025, he didn't fight it. No last-minute appeals, no pleas for mercy. It was as if he had been waiting for this day since the trial ended. At 4:30 p.m., Ronald was given his final meal: 2 double cheeseburgers with bacon, extra pickles, a large order of fries, a vanilla milkshake, and a slice of pecan pie. He ate slowly, methodically, like a man trying to remember the taste of the world before it disappeared. By 6:45, the warden entered his cell. "It's time." Ronald nodded. He walked to the death chamber with his head high, his feet steady. Behind the glass window, the Jensen family sat in silence. Some held each other. One just stared. When Ronald was strapped to the gurney, the chaplain asked if he wanted to say anything. He paused. The room held its breath. Then he spoke, calmly. "It's time, that's all." Those were his final words. At 7:03 p.m., the first drug was administered. Ronald didn't flinch. His breathing slowed. His eyes flickered once, then closed. 6 minutes later, he was declared dead. No tears, no apologies, no closure. But outside, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the lights inside the prison dimmed, a small group of people stood vigil for the Jensens. They weren't there for Ronald. They were there to remember the lives he tried to erase, the teacher who gave extra time after school, the husband who still brought his wife flowers every Friday, 2 people whose only mistake was trusting the lock on their front door. Ronald Travis may have left this world without remorse, but the fire he started, the one inside the hearts of a grieving family, still burns. July 9, 2025, Mississippi State Penitentiary, known to many simply as Parchman Farm, a place with a reputation for ghosts, secrets, and the slow crawl of death. At precisely 5 p.m., Jerome Miller sat at a steel table in the prison cafeteria, eating the last meal of his life: fried chicken, mashed potatoes, cornbread, sweet tea. A Southern meal, like the ones his mother used to cook when he was still a boy, before the darkness swallowed him whole. Jerome wasn't just another inmate on death row. He was a former corrections officer, a man who once wore the uniform, who once stood on the other side of the bars. But in 2012, all that shattered. He became the very thing he used to lock away: a killer. His crime was unthinkable. Over the course of one rainy April night, he murdered 3 people: his estranged wife, her new boyfriend, and his own 14-year-old son. Prosecutors called it a fit of jealous rage. He called it a moment I can't undo. The facts were brutal. His wife, Angela, had filed for divorce and moved on. Jerome didn't take it well. That night, he waited outside her house for hours, before breaking in through the back door. He had a gun, he used it. 3 gunshots, 3 lives gone. But what tore the courtroom apart wasn't just the crime. It was who the third victim was. His son, Marcus. A bright, quiet kid who wanted to be a teacher. He was shot once in the chest. The prosecution argued it was deliberate. Jerome never denied it. He just didn't speak. During the trial, the jury watched home videos of Marcus's last birthday. In one of them, he's eating fried chicken and mashed potatoes, smiling, sitting beside his dad. It was that image that haunted everyone, including the judge, who reportedly cried during sentencing. What made Jerome's story even more disturbing was what came after. He went on the run for nearly a year, using the same training he'd once used as a guard to evade capture. Burned clothing, wiped down surfaces. He even mailed fake letters to law enforcement, trying to throw them off his trail. But the guilt caught up eventually. In late 2013, he was arrested outside a gas station, living under a fake name. On death row, Jerome transformed. He grew a beard, gained weight, started reading philosophy and scripture. He refused media interviews but wrote over 200 letters to his sister, the only family member who didn't abandon him. In those letters, he talked often about Marcus, about what he could have been, about how Jerome knew deep down he could never be forgiven. When the execution was scheduled, Jerome didn't fight it. His lawyer submitted a standard appeal, but Jerome himself told the court, "I'm not afraid to go. I've been gone since the day I pulled that trigger." At 6:30 p.m., Jerome was escorted to the death chamber. He looked straight ahead, calm. No visible fear. Behind the glass, his sister watched with tears in her eyes. No one from the victim's side showed up. They didn't need to see it. Strapped to the gurney, Jerome was asked if he had any final words. He took a breath. "I killed what I loved. I deserve this." No one spoke after that. The first injection was administered. Jerome blinked slowly, then closed his eyes. His chest rose and fell, once, twice, then stopped. At 6:38 p.m., he was pronounced dead. A man who once guarded the lives of others had ended 3, including his own blood. And in the end, he faced death the way he lived, not with excuses, but with quiet, devastating regret. July 14th, 2025. Raindrops tapped against the windows of Florida State Prison like ticking clocks. The sky was dark before sunset, and the air felt heavier than usual. Inside the gray walls of the death unit, 31-year-old Anthony Ramos sat quietly in a corner of his cell, a worn-out Bible open in his lap. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from something deeper. Maybe sorrow, maybe confusion, maybe both. Anthony's story was the most controversial of the month. To some, he was a cold-blooded killer. To others, a deeply broken man failed by the system long before he ever took a life. In 2017, Anthony was just 24 years old when he committed the crimes that would seal his fate. 3 elderly women, all living in the same neighborhood in Jacksonville, each trusting, each alone, each murdered in the same terrifying way. He posed as a city maintenance worker, knocking on doors with a clipboard and a polite smile. Once inside, he strangled them with items he found in their homes: a curtain cord, a scarf, a belt. Then he took jewelry, cash, and left. It wasn't about money. It was about control. When police finally connected the dots, they found Anthony living just a few streets away. The evidence was overwhelming: DNA, fingerprints, and one victim's ring found in his girlfriend's purse. During the trial, prosecutors painted him as a textbook predator, a manipulator, a man who enjoyed watching his victims suffer. But Anthony's defense team had another story to tell. They brought in psychiatric experts who spoke of severe childhood abuse, early signs of schizophrenia, and repeated neglect by Child Protective Services. One psychiatrist said, "He was born broken, and then everyone around him kept breaking him more." The courtroom was split. The jury wasn't. He was sentenced to death. On death row, Anthony changed. Slowly, he began reading theology, writing poetry, and attending counseling. He even reached out to the granddaughter of one of his victims. He wrote her 3 letters. Only one was ever answered. No one knows what was said. As his execution date neared, Anthony requested a Catholic priest. He spent hours in confession. On the morning of July 14th, he declined breakfast and instead fasted all day. At 4:45 p.m., he requested his final meal, a grilled cheese sandwich, tomato soup, and a red apple. It was simple, childish even. When asked why, he said softly, "It's the first meal I ever made by myself when I was a kid. It made me feel safe." By 6:50 p.m., the chamber was prepared. He walked in without resistance. Unlike the others, Anthony asked that a crucifix be placed beside him. The priest stood silently at the edge of the room. As he was strapped to the gurney, a guard asked if he wanted to make a final statement. Anthony nodded, turned his head slightly toward the glass window where no one from the victims' families stood, only prison officials, and said, "I hope they know I'm sorry. I hope they know I wasn't born this way." Tears welled up in his eyes, and as the first chemical entered his veins, those tears streamed down his cheeks. It took 7 minutes. His chest rose and fell slow and soft, like he was drifting into sleep. Then, stillness. Anthony Ramos died quietly. No protests, no media circus, just a man with a dark past, a deadly present, and a future that never came. What he did was unforgivable. But in his final moments, he wasn't a monster. He was a broken man facing the end, and maybe, finally, understanding what it meant to destroy something you can never rebuild. July 20th, 2025. California. The wind swept harshly across the razor wire of Pelican Bay State Prison, but inside its supermax wing, the air was dead still. Buried deep in solitary confinement, Jonathan Blake, once feared across the West Coast as the Silencer, waited for the sound of approaching boots. After 11 years in isolation, he knew that when they came this time, they wouldn't be escorting him back. Jonathan wasn't just another death row inmate. He was a ghost in the criminal underworld, cold, calculated, and invisible until it was too late. A former enforcer for a powerful drug syndicate, Jonathan's specialty wasn't just carrying out violence, it was eliminating problems, permanently. In 2011, he orchestrated one of the most brutal witness murders in modern federal history. His target, a 29-year-old man named Travis Dean, who had agreed to testify against the gang in a multi-state drug trafficking trial. Jonathan never touched Travis himself. He didn't need to. He used prison phones, coded messages, and contacts on the outside to coordinate a kidnapping, days of torture, and eventually, a bullet to the back of Travis's head. His body was found in a ditch outside Modesto, hands tied, mouth duct-taped, eyes still open. The message was clear: snitch, and you die. That single murder shook the justice system to its core. Trials were delayed, witnesses pulled out, judges demanded more protection. The FBI launched a federal investigation that eventually led back to Jonathan. Phone taps, informants, hidden notes written in lemon juice. His operation was ruthless and sophisticated, but it wasn't enough to stop what was coming. At trial, Jonathan never flinched. He wore a tailored suit, clean shave. He didn't beg, didn't speak. The jury took just 2 hours to sentence him to death. But even behind bars, in the darkest wing of Pelican Bay, he remained feared. Guards rotated frequently. He was kept in 23-hour isolation. No books, no TV, no visitors. He spoke only to lawyers and priests, and even they said his eyes felt like knives. In the days before his execution, Jonathan finally changed one detail. He asked for music. Classical. Beethoven, specifically. He listened to it during his final days, eyes closed, as if trying to memorize every note. He refused spiritual counseling, declined any family contact, and didn't respond to media inquiries. There was no farewell, no reflection, just silence, his signature. On July 20th at 6:15 p.m., he was led into the execution chamber. He didn't resist. His expression was blank, unreadable. The warden noted it felt like walking a man into a business meeting, not an execution. Jonathan's last meal was strange in its simplicity. 2 scoops of cookies and cream ice cream. Nothing more. When asked about it, he replied, "It's the only thing I never shared with anyone." The witness's room was half empty. No family, no victims' relatives. Only 2 federal officers and a prison chaplain stood behind the glass. The warden leaned in and asked if he had any final words. Jonathan turned his head slowly and said, in a voice low and flat, "It ends here." That was it. At 6:33 p.m., the first drug entered his system. For a moment, his eyes stayed open, focused on the ceiling like he was watching something the rest of the world couldn't see. Then they shut. The man who once struck fear into entire communities, who silenced others with a phone call, was, finally, silenced himself. But even in death, his legacy lingers. Federal marshals still tell his story to new recruits. Prosecutors still use his name in training slides titled, "When Silence Kills." And for the families of witnesses across America, the ghost of Jonathan Blake still lives, not in what he said, but in the cold, terrifying silence he left behind. July 27th, 2025, Arkansas. Just before sunrise, the faint sound of birds could be heard beyond the razor wire of Cummins' unit. But inside the prison walls, where the air was always stale and cold, there was only dread. The guards moved with solemn discipline. No joking, no small talk. Today was not like other days. Today, they would be escorting Marcus Hill to his death. Marcus wasn't infamous like the others. There were no documentaries about him, no tabloid headlines. But in the small town of White Bluff, Arkansas, his name was still spoken with disgust. Even after 16 years, the memory of his crime was enough to make people double-check their door locks, pull their children close, and whisper prayers they hadn't said in years. In 2009, Marcus Hill was arrested for the rape and murder of 9-year-old Claire Donovan, a quiet, sweet girl who loved to draw pictures of her cat and leave them taped to the fridge. Claire went missing one evening while riding her bike 3 houses down from her home. It wasn't a stranger abduction. It was a betrayal. Marcus, a part-time janitor who had helped fix her school's plumbing weeks before, had watched, waited, and then acted. There was no forced entry, no signs of a struggle. She was gone in minutes. A town-wide search turned frantic by the second day. Her body was found in a drainage ditch near a construction site. The autopsy confirmed what no parent should ever have to hear. Marcus was caught through discarded DNA evidence found on a soda can in his car. His arrest sent shockwaves. He had no prior record, no red flags, just a quiet loner with a sad face and empty eyes. His trial was swift. Jurors cried. Even the judge couldn't hold it together as the details were read aloud. On death row, Marcus was the definition of stillness. He never spoke about the crime, never showed remorse. He refused therapy, counseling, even religious outreach. Some guards said he would sit for hours staring at a crack in the wall. Others said he scribbled pages of something at night, then flushed them down the toilet before morning. No one ever found out what he wrote. He took it with him. As his execution date drew near, there were no rallies, no interviews, no letters, not a single visitor, not even a lawyer sat beside him. He waived his final appeals and said, "There's nothing left to say." At 4:30 p.m., he was brought his final meal, pancakes, eggs, maple syrup, and a cup of black coffee. He ate every bite, slowly, like he hadn't tasted real food in years. When the tray was taken away, he stood up without being asked. No resistance, no questions. At 6:57 p.m., he entered the death chamber barefoot. His hands were trembling slightly, but his face remained blank. There were no victims' family members behind the glass. Claire's parents had passed away years earlier, some said from heartbreak. Only 2 journalists and the warden watched as Marcus was strapped down. He was asked if he had any final words. He shook his head. And then he closed his eyes, before the injection even began. At 7:08 p.m., he was pronounced dead. No drama, no protest. Just another end in a month filled with them. But his crime? That will never truly die. Because when a child is taken, murdered, and discarded like trash, something shifts in the soul of a community. Something deep, something unfixable. Claire's bedroom remained untouched until the house was eventually sold. Her drawings, some water-stained, some sun-bleached, were still found on the fridge when the new owners moved in. Marcus Hill didn't just kill a little girl. He took away peace, safety, innocence. And though his life ended on a cold table, his shadow remains in the silence he left behind.